And thank you, everybody, for joining us. As Whitney said, my name is Matt Shanahan. As the Chief Strategy Officer, I work with customers to really develop best practices and benchmark processes in accounts receivable. Today, what we'll be looking at is what we call the 3P's of activity management. To do that, we'll cover some background on Lockstep, then we'll examine really, when we talk about management, what can you manage and what can you not manage in a process. And then from there, we'll talk about management of the key metrics and what the current state of activity management is for most accounts receivable departments. Then we'll cover the 3P's, which really focus on productivity, prioritization, performance in accounts receivable. As a background about Lockstep, Lockstep is the publisher of Anytime Collect. Anytime Collect is an AR automation solution, and it makes collecting cash faster and easier. Another way to think about it is it makes your bank balance bigger. Anytime Collect is in use by over 170 companies globally and has more than 10,000 users of the application and online self-service. We are the leader in ERP integration. Our integration platform has the most number of connectors in the industry. So we do work with any of your systems, and we're adding new integrations every month. So with that as a background, let's jump into our topic. First, as an AR professional, what can you really manage? It seems like an easy question, but many departments are measuring what they can't. They're not measuring what they can manage, they're measuring what they can measure. So let's examine that a little bit further and talk about that. It goes without saying there's a significant amount of pressure on every accounts receivable department to collect the cash. Management plays a crucial role in reaching that objective, but can collections performance really be managed in detail? I mean, tactically managed. Our research suggests it can. We talked to a lot of controllers and AR managers in various industries regarding which metrics they monitor and why. The discussions have revealed a lot of metrics considered by leadership to be key to effective collections management, but which ones, really? We looked at each metric individually and asked the simple question, can this metric be measured? Can this metric be managed? Our criteria, quote unquote, managing, became that a manager could directly influence the metric, asking somebody on their team to do something differently. And that would create the desired change in the metric. Our research confirmed our suspicions that some numbers just can't be managed, no matter how hard managers try, but some numbers can be managed. And that a lot of technology is blocking the ability to do that. So here's some metrics that we talked to were, quite frankly, business results. We found metrics in 3 classes, each one having their own value and purpose. At the highest level, AR departments measure those business results. Business results are metrics such as working capital or days sales outstanding that represent the culmination of efforts. As managers talk about managing DSO, business results are ultimately unmanageable. If a manager could directly manage DSO, then every AR department in the world would meet its targets, because all they would need to do is say, hey, we need to lower DSO. That would sound out maybe from the controller, and the AR staff would say, no problem, we'll make that happen. But that's not what happens. We also found that there was a second kind of metric. While not directly manageable, it could be heavily influenced, and those are really accounts receivable objectives. AR objectives are specific targets that an organization asks for the AR department to reach, like a certain amount of percentage past due. But AR objectives are not directly manageable either. To lower past due requires consent from the customer. The customer actually has to pay. And we all know that customers can have their own priorities or issues at any one point in time. So what is manageable? What AR professionals can control is a third class of metrics that we call accounts receivable activities. These are the numbers that AR managers gather, such as number of collections calls, number of emails, number of conversations, percentage of invoices influenced. This is very tactical stuff, but this is the stuff that AR staff and managers actually do. So AR activities are the metrics that can be managed. And if you want more collections calls each week, Make it happen. You want more dispute resolve? Make that happen too. You might encounter some process or compliance issues, but that's why you need then activity management. So activity management really becomes the basis for managing collections performance. Of course, the other metrics are important, but those numbers are the lagging indicators. Business results and AR objectives today are the results of AR activities from last month. So if an AR team makes more calls in AR activity, then it will probably reduce past due, an AR objective. If past due is lower, lower DSO and bigger bank balance will follow, which are business results. So this is really the importance then on activities, measuring activities and being able to improve them. So with that in mind, how is activity management done today? Shelter in place triggered a massive migration from working in the office to working from home. In the US, this was a series of events that started in March. As Whitney said, I live in Washington State, which moved to shelter in place on March 23rd. One of the big realizations during this migration is just how essential accounts receivable teams are. Continuity of collections became critical to the survival of all businesses, especially as access to credit is tightening. Another realization is shelter in place will change how accounts receivables manages activities. That's because the migration to remote work exposed underlying conditions of the way activities are done. These conditions need to be addressed to be productive and scalable, especially in the new normal, where remote work will remain probably a permanent feature for many, many organizations. And just out of curiosity, before we kind of look into some of these underlying conditions, we'd love to know from you, how many of you will expect to remain remote or at least partly remote after reopening? Great, we're getting some good responses in. And actually, the majority of people are expecting, to essentially continue to work remotely as things go forward. So thank you, everyone, for participating in the poll. So the pandemic exposed the problem of manual processes. The pandemic basically increased the workload for the AR team because there was increased collections risk. All the traditional credit scores had kind of gone out the window. AR staff really now wants to contact as many customers as possible to assess collectability. Who should be called first? What are the priorities? Much of that decision making is really up to individual AR staff. Each staff member starts the day reviewing their inbox and manual aging reports to make up their to-do list for the day. Then they set out calling to ask for confirmations. Installment plans are becoming more common, and they need to extend payment terms and get promises of future payment. All these confirmations, plans, extensions, and promises have to be recorded and tracked, but where? How? For most people, that really means spreadsheets, right? So doing lots of data entry, I've got to remember, this customer's promised to pay me on this date, that goes into a spreadsheet. Being able to say, here's the installment plan, somebody's got to track that somewhere, and then follow up on all of those. Those are the manual processes that we're talking about, making to-do lists, tracking everything in Excel. Also, entering data in and out of the ERP system itself, from email and transcribing it. Now, the pandemic also exposed the limits of manual reporting. What used to be weekly forecasting and reporting is becoming daily. There's really growing requirements, for the AR staff to roll up, if you will, information about what they're doing or what they expect for cash coming in. And that ultimately results in a lot of cut and paste assembly and email distribution. As a manager, the question becomes, how do you know who is working on what got done? Did the team focus on the right things? These are questions that can't be answered just by walking around the room and polling everybody. So when you're remote, that's going to require some amount of reporting. And if that reporting is manual, it uses up a lot of valuable time. So the increase in manual reporting and forecasting means lots of lost valuable time that should have been put towards customer conversations. how can this be quantified? In our benchmarks, AR staff without AR automation require 25 to 40 minutes per phone call. How does that break down? This includes prep time to get information pulled together in order to make the call time with the customers, and then post-call administration, things like writing up notes, reporting to different stakeholders. All of that has to take time. Through the combination of phone calls and emails, what we find is that the average AR staff person is able to complete anywhere from 40 to 60 outbound communications per day. The limited capacity of that means that less than 10% of customers are contacted after invoice presentment. And that's because the staff typically is being focused on the 60 days past due and above. So they're looking at sort of the extremely late. In fact, what the Hackett group indicated is that one of the biggest obstacles to reducing day sales outstanding was the lack of technology adoption by accounting departments. And that's what we've seen. It's easy to see why. Most accounting departments that we talk to, especially as they're entering an evaluation process of our technology, are using Outlook and Excel as their technology stack. And as we know, with no integration to the ERP, it means there's constantly a transcription between emails and the ERP. You're either pulling information out of the ERP and writing an email, or taking information out of the email and plugging it into the ERP. So, and then without automation, it means all those follow-ups, promises, disputes, you're tracking those in spreadsheets, managing that, reviewing those manually, rather than having automation that can guide when and where you need to engage. And then without activity management, the visibility into what got done isn't available. So it's hard to control and get on top of it. We'd love to get a poll for the team here. Is just how many of you use Outlook and Excel as your primary tools for managing collections today? That's great. So out of the poll here, it showed that over 70% rely on Outlook and Excel. So it is interesting, and that's a very common thing that we see. And again, thank you for participating in the polling. So let's jump into the 3P's of activity management. Now, this is based on software designed for accounts receivable, and it really focuses, as I mentioned, around productivity, prioritization, and performance. I will use screenshots from our product to demonstrate this, just because it makes it real. It takes it sort of out of the abstract and saying, well, what do we mean by all this? So a little bit about how our solution works, just to set some context. Anytime Collect synchronizes directly with your ERP or CRM to get data required for the collections process. On top of that, there's something we call AR sequencing, which is a configurable rules engine that automatically initiates customer communications or assigns team activities. And the goal is to focus, obviously, is on-time payment. There's automated communications. Those triggered automated communications deliver personalized communication across email or SMS or even automated calls. It includes information about the invoice, links for how to pay it, obviously provides statement balances, all of that. So it's highly personalized to the customer. Those communications really try and drive the customers to a self-service portal where they can make their payments online. And then, as we mentioned, if the customer doesn't pay in a timely way, or there's a certain need for credit review or an onboarding, that rules engine will actually create and assign an activity for a member of the AR staff that allows them to engage the customers and follow up. That's the general framework of how Anytime Collect works. As we go through this today, I'll be focused really on the automated communications and the activity management as it pertains to the 3P's that we talked about on activity management. So in the language of the metrics that you can manage, productivity simply means complete more activities. And there's really two keys to managing that productivity. As we talked about, our benchmarks show a significant amount of time spent on non-customer facing work, things like reporting or chasing information. A key to managing productivity is to automate that kind of work, especially because it takes away from time that could be spent engaging customers. So that's one side of it, is really automate that non-customer facing work. And then the other side is really to automate transactional communications. If staff have to send out reminders or send out statements, this is time taken away from important conversations around onboarding, disputes, payment plans. Those tend to be the higher value components that we want to be able to let staff focus on. And at Anytime Collect, we have a technology called Smart Activities. The goal of Smart Activities is to automate a lot of those non-customer facing work. An activity in Anytime Collect is an assignment, as we talked about, for someone on the AR team to complete. This is the user interface that somebody uses to work on an activity. And one of the things that you'll notice, what makes this activity smart, is it automatically assembles all the necessary information needed to complete the activity, eliminating that need to chase things down. All the relevant invoices are available right here, and they can get other ones as well if there's other reference ones. All the relevant contacts are available. Previous notes are here. Even information about the customer. So up here, you could drop down and look at payment history and anything else. So you, as an AR person, you have one application to work with. You don't have to log into multiple. Everything you need to complete the activity from an information resource is available to you right as you're working on the activity. That's an important way of saying, okay, I'm going to save the time that used to be put into chasing information down and apply it to more calls and email conversations. The other way a smart activity sort of helps out is to get rid of a lot of the admin and data entry by making that automated. Rather than updating spreadsheets with promises or follow-ups or notes, all of that can be automatically stored. So as I'm working on my activity, I can say, hey, the customer made a promise, click it. They said they're going to do it by this date, click it. Okay, now that it's being tracked automatically by the system, and it will follow up. If the customer doesn't meet the promise, it'll tell you that the promise was broken, and it'll queue that up for you to follow up on. Likewise, there may be a follow-up that you need to do, and it may be by a certain due date. You can say, schedule that follow-up and track it for me, right? So that's automation that's working for you. All of those kinds of things allow you to, be able to get rid of the spreadsheets that were, taking up all your time on admin and data entry. And then all of this information as payments and things come in gets synchronized with the ERP so that you're not having to do data entry there as well. Then there's, reporting. So how smart activities allow automated reporting to kick in. So when was this activity created? Well, that's automatically recorded. When was the activity completed? That's recorded. Who did the activity? That's automatically captured. It's also capturing, as we talked about, specific statuses of whether there were follow-ups, whether we talked to the customer, whether there was a promise made. So there's a lot of rich reporting that now can come out of this that suddenly makes, if I as an individual collector, I don't have to report that stuff up. It's getting reported automatically on my behalf. And it's saving me time so I can, again, go focus around what's most important. As we talked about, there's really two things. One is, how do you automate some of the non-customer facing, tasks? And so you can think of those smart activities as really being automation-assisted activities. And really focusing on these high-value ones, such as negotiating a payment plan or resolving a dispute, are key. But using the definition of productivity is more tasks or activities completed, some activities can be completely automated. These automated activities include things like reminders, notifications, statements, and they're incredibly important to keeping the customer informed and payments on time. But these are, if we wanted to focus, the team on the higher value ones, let's automate these transactional ones and make it easy for them to do. And as we talked about, it's important to have a sequencing engine that's responsible for these rules of when should an automated communication go out, like an email reminder. When should the first collections call be done? A credit review that should be done. All these different rules allow people to really focus on spending time with the customer, knowing that the system will organize and schedule activities as needed. Which brings us into the second P around prioritization. And prioritization is, are we completing the right activities? As discussed in the benchmarks, most AR staff make their own to-do list, which can impact collections effectiveness if they aren't the right tasks or if everybody's using a different strategy for what they build their to-do list off of. The key to managing prioritization is to automate the generation of each of members' task list and set goals. With Anytime Collect, an AR manager can define the relative priority of tasks. So for instance, here, this is the priorities that were set up in this instance of do a first collection call as the highest priority, followed by credit review, followed by second collection call. So there's some things here. And then for the individual AR staff, that's exactly what they get as the next best task. So they're not having to think about, what do I do next? As we saw, they can click on this, go straight into the activity. All the information that they need to complete the activity is there. And ultimately, their ability to engage more customers and get more done is all based on that ability to focus on the right things and do each of them productively. And finally, the third P is performance. Continuous improvement is a question of whether individual team members are meeting their goals, and it involves coaching, right? So if they're not meeting their goals, why, and how do you help them do that? It's also prioritizing and making sure that the prioritizing is correct. Does it need to be adjusted? To understand that, you really want to understand how each individual is performing on their activities and results. So the key to coaching and adjustment then is automating that activity reporting. This is a new feature that we're about to release. It provides a drill down into each member of the team to understand key points about it. For instance, during a certain time period, maybe today, for Maria, what % of accounts were touched, right, or influenced by her activities today? What % of the invoices were influenced today? How many emails maybe were sent out? How many calls were made? What was the response time for that? Are there any customer inquiries that haven't been replied to yet? All of that, it gives insight into how Maria's doing. And then the ability to look across the team and understand the difference in performance across the team is in there as well. This allows to identify maybe there's a team member that needs coaching. Maybe there's a member of the staff that's doing really well and has some interesting techniques. These are all things that are extremely powerful in the ability to constantly improve. So to manage collections performance, you ultimately need to manage the activity. As the migration to remote work has shown, many Outlook and Excel, kind of reliances aren't sufficient. There's not visibility to do this. To manage productivity, automation is needed so that the AR staff can have more calls and conversations. To manage priorities, there needs to be a way to generate the to-do list automatically. And ultimately, to manage performance, you need to be able to examine and coach individuals so that they can improve. We hope you found today's webinar useful and informative.